My manipulative brother was taking all the money from our dying mother. So I exposed him, and she kicked him out. He came back to steal from her again. So this time I called the police, and that's when my mother revealed a nasty secret about him. Ever since our mom got sick, my brother Tom had become a permanent fixture at her house. At first, I thought it was sweet. After all, she didn't have much time left, and it was good for her to have company. But after a while, I started noticing things that didn't sit right. Mom seemed anxious whenever Tom was around, and whenever I visited, she'd ask me if I knew how much she had in her bank account, even though she used to be meticulous with her finances. It didn't make sense for her to be running low on money with the insurance payout she received after Dad passed away. Before I continue, don't forget to like this post, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. Now, let me tell you how this all unfolded. One day, I decided to pay her a surprise visit. I took the afternoon off work, grabbed some of her favorite flowers, and headed over. As I pulled up, I saw Tom's car in the driveway. Typical. He was practically living there. I walked in, greeted by silence, except for the low murmur of voices coming from the living room. My footsteps were quiet on the carpet as I approached, catching Tom's voice, low and conspiratorial. "Come on, Mom. You know I wouldn't ask if I didn't need it. Just a couple of thousand. You know how expensive school is for the kids." School? Tom didn't even have kids. Not unless there were nieces or nephews I had never heard of. My stomach twisted as I peered around the corner. Tom had a tight grip on Mom's hands, his face a mask of feigned concern. I couldn't listen to another word. "What's going on here?" I asked, stepping into the room. Tom jumped back, startled, but quickly masked it with a charming smile. "Hey, sis. Just talking to Mom about some stuff. Family things." "Family things, huh?" I shot back, not bothering to hide my sarcasm. "Like kids that don't exist?" Mom's eyes darted between us, confused and worried. I don't understand." Tom said his kids needed. "He doesn't have kids, Mom," I said gently, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "He's been lying to you." Tom's smile faded, replaced by a defensive scowl. "Why do you always have to ruin everything, huh? Can't you see I'm trying to help Mom out here? Help her by taking her money?" I retorted. "How much have you taken, Tom?" The room fell silent. Mom's face crumpled, realization dawning as she looked from me to Tom. "Tom, is that true? You've been lying to me?" Tom's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He was caught, and he knew it. "It's not like that, okay? I just needed some money, and you've got plenty. What's the big deal?" "The big deal," I said, standing up, "is that you're taking advantage of a sick woman. Your own mother, no less. This is low, even for you." Tom shot me a venomous glare, then turned to Mom, desperation in his eyes. "Please, Mom, don't listen to her. You know she's always had it out for me." But Mom was shaking her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, Tom. You need to leave. Now." "What?" Tom's voice cracked. "You're kicking me out? Over her lies?" Mom's voice was firm, despite her tears. "I know my daughter. She wouldn't lie about something like this. You need to go, Tom. I can't believe you'd do this to me." Tom stood there for a moment, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then, with a snarl, he turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Mom collapsed into sobs, and I held her, trying to comfort her even as my mind reeled with anger and disbelief. How could he do this to her? How long had he been taking advantage of her? As I sat there, holding my mother, I vowed to myself that I would keep Tom away from her. He wasn't going to hurt her anymore, not if I could help it. But little did I know, this was only the beginning. Tom wasn't done with us yet. Not by a long shot. Tom didn't stay away for long. Less than a week after our confrontation, Mom called me in tears, saying she had heard someone outside, late at night, near the windows. I rushed over, heart pounding, and stayed with her until the sun came up. But there was no sign of anyone, no broken windows, no footprints in the flower beds. Just a lingering sense of unease. 2 days later, I came over again to check on her. Mom seemed jumpy, like she was expecting Tom to pop out from behind a corner at any moment. Her once bright eyes were dull with worry. She flinched at every sound, her nerves clearly frayed. I hated seeing her like this, knowing Tom was the cause of her distress. "Mom, you need to get a restraining order," I said, handing her a cup of tea as we sat at the kitchen table. "Tom is dangerous. He's desperate, and he's not thinking straight." She shook her head, staring into her cup. "He's my son. I can't do that to him. He's just lost his way. He's still family." "Family doesn't do what he's done," I insisted. "He lied to you, manipulated you, and stole from you. He's not going to stop, Mom. Not until he's taken everything." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I don't understand how he could do this. He was such a sweet boy. What happened to him?" I didn't have an answer, so I just held her hand, squeezing it gently. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the wall. I could feel the tension in her, the worry and fear, and it made me angrier with Tom than I'd ever been. Later that night, I was awoken by the sound of glass breaking. My heart skipped a beat, and I jumped out of bed, grabbing my phone. I ran down the hall, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. I found Mom in the living room, staring at the broken window, her face pale. "Stay here," I whispered, dialing 911 as I crept toward the broken window. My breath was quick and shallow, and my hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm. I peered out, my eyes straining in the darkness, and then I saw him. Tom was crouched by the bushes, trying to jimmy open the window lock. He didn't see me, too focused on his task. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and rage. "Tom!" I shouted, stepping back as the phone connected with the emergency operator. "What the hell are you doing?" He froze, then looked up, his face twisted with a snarl. "You just can't leave well enough alone, can you?" "Leave? You broke into Mom's house." I yelled. "Get out of here before the cops show up." "I just need some money," he shouted back, his voice desperate. "I lost my job, okay? I have nothing. Just give me what's in the safe, and I'll be gone." "No," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You're not getting a damn thing. Not anymore." His face darkened, and he lunged at me, but I backed away, holding the phone up like a shield. "The cops are on their way, Tom. Leave now, or they'll arrest you." For a moment, I thought he might actually attack me, but then he turned and fled, disappearing into the night. I watched him go, my body trembling with adrenaline, and then I turned back to Mom. She was sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands, sobbing quietly. I sat beside her, wrapping my arms around her, feeling the tears sting my own eyes. "It's going to be okay," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "The police will find him, and he'll have to answer for what he's done. He can't hurt us anymore." But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Tom wasn't just desperate, he was dangerous. And if he was willing to break into Mom's house in the middle of the night, there was no telling what he might do next. The police arrived a few minutes later, taking statements and looking around the property. They promised to increase patrols in the area, to keep an eye out for Tom. I felt a little better knowing they were on alert, but I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot worse. As the officers were leaving, Mom suddenly spoke up, her voice trembling. "There's something you need to know," she said, looking at me with eyes filled with guilt. "Something I've been keeping from you. It's about Tom." I frowned, sitting down beside her. "What is it, Mom? You can tell me." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling in her lap. Tom, he's not your real brother. He's not even my real son. The room seemed to tilt, and I stared at her, stunned. What? What are you talking about? Mom wiped her eyes, her voice breaking. Years ago, before you were born, I had an affair. Your father and we were going through a rough patch, and I made a terrible mistake. He's the result of that affair. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Everything I thought I knew about my family was suddenly in question. Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell him? We decided it was best if no one knew, she said, her voice barely a whisper. We thought it would be easier if we all pretended he was your father's son. But Tom always knew. He found out when he was a teenager. He found a letter I had written to his real father, but never sent. Since then, he's hated us for lying to him. He's been different. Different. That was putting it mildly. My mind raced, trying to process this new information. Tom wasn't really my brother. He wasn't really Mom's son, and he'd known for years, simmering in resentment and anger. It explained so much. The way he always seemed to have a chip on his shoulder, the way he could never quite fit in with the rest of us. But it also raised so many more questions. Why hadn't he ever confronted us? Why had he waited so long to act out? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. Tom wasn't going to stop. Not until he had what he thought he was owed. And if he couldn't get it from us, he might just take it by force. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Tom wasn't really my brother. All those years of resentment, all the tension, it suddenly made sense. But knowing the truth didn't make it easier to accept. It just made everything messy. Mom was still crying, her shoulders shaking as she tried to apologize. I'm so sorry, honey. I never meant for you to find out this way. I didn't know what else to do. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions inside me. It's okay, Mom. We'll figure this out. But right now, we need to make sure you're safe. Tom is dangerous, and he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants. Mom nodded, wiping her eyes. What do we do? I thought about it for a moment. We needed more than just increased police patrols. We needed a real plan. We'll change the locks and install security cameras. And we need to make sure all your finances are secure. I'll go to the bank tomorrow and make sure Tom can't access anything. Mom agreed, and we spent the rest of the night planning how to protect her. It felt strange, almost surreal, to be taking these precautions against my own brother, against Tom. But the person he had become wasn't the brother I grew up with. He was someone else, someone driven by anger and desperation. The next morning, I went to the bank to make sure Tom was removed from all of Mom's accounts. The manager was sympathetic and assured me they'd take care of everything. I also hired a locksmith to change all the locks on Mom's house, and I ordered a set of security cameras online, which I planned to install as soon as they arrived. For the next few days, things were quiet. Too quiet. I stayed with Mom, keeping an eye on things, but there was no sign of Tom. It was almost as if he had disappeared. And while that should have been a relief, it only made me more nervous. I knew Tom, and I knew he wasn't the type to give up easily. One evening, as I was making dinner, Mom came into the kitchen, looking worried. Have you heard from Tom? She asked. I shook my head. No, and that's what scares me. He's up to something. I just know it. Mom bit her lip, her hands wringing together. Maybe we should call him. Try to talk to him. Maybe we can work this out. Work this out. I set down the knife I was holding, staring at her. Mom, he broke into your house. He tried to steal from you. What's there to work out? I know, but he's still my son, she said, her voice breaking. I can't just give up on him. I wanted to argue, but I could see the pain in her eyes. She was torn between her love for Tom and her fear of what he might do. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Okay, let's try calling him. But if he refuses to listen, we need to be prepared to protect ourselves. Mom nodded, and we sat down at the kitchen table. She dialed Tom's number, her hands shaking. The phone rang, and just when I thought it would go to voicemail, he picked up. "What do you want?" Tom's voice was cold, distant. "Tom, it's me," Mom said, her voice wavering. "I just want to talk. Can we please meet? Just to talk?" There was a long pause, and I held my breath, waiting for his response. Finally, he sighed. "Fine, but not at the house. I'll text you the address." Mom agreed, and the line went dead. We looked at each other, anxiety etched on her face. "Do you think he'll come?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But if he does, we need to be ready. I'll come with you." We waited, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. A few minutes later, Mom's phone buzzed with a text. She looked at it, then handed it to me. It was an address, an old park on the edge of town, a place we used to go to when we were kids. I frowned, my mind racing. Why there? What was he planning? "Let's go," I said, grabbing my coat. "And Mom, promise me you'll stay in the car until we know it's safe." She nodded, and we headed out, the air heavy with the promise of rain. The drive was silent, both of us lost in our thoughts. As we pulled up to the park, I scanned the area, looking for any sign of Tom. The park was deserted, the playground empty, and the swings swaying gently in the breeze. We got out of the car, and I kept a firm grip on Mom's arm. "Stay close," I whispered, my eyes darting around. We walked toward the old picnic table near the edge of the park, our footsteps crunching on the gravel. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, every nerve on high alert. Suddenly, Tom stepped out from behind a tree, his face pale and drawn. He looked different, thinner, more haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. But his eyes were the same, filled with that familiar anger and resentment. "Mom," he said, his voice flat. "What do you want?" Mom stepped forward, her voice soft and pleading. "Tom, please. We just want to help you. Come home. We can work this out together." "Work this out?" Tom laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "There's nothing to work out. I'm done with you both. I just want what's mine." "What's yours?" I snapped, stepping between them. "You don't deserve anything after what you've done. You've lied, stolen, and broken into Mom's house. And now you expect us to just give you money?" Tom's face twisted with anger. "You don't understand. I'm the one who's been lied to. My whole life, I was told I was someone I'm not. I don't owe you anything. I'm taking what I'm owed." "What are you talking about?" I shot back. "You're not owed anything. We all grew up in the same house, with the same parents. Whatever issues you have are because of your own choices. You have no idea what it's like," he snarled, "to know that you're nothing but a mistake, that your whole life is a lie." "You're not a mistake, Tom," Mom said, tears streaming down her face. "You're my son, no matter what. Please, just come home." But Tom shook his head, stepping back. "No, I'm done being your charity case. I'm done pretending. I just want what's mine, and then I'll be out of your lives for good." He turned to leave, and in a split second, everything changed. I don't know what made him do it. Maybe he saw the car keys in my hand. Maybe he just snapped. But he lunged at me, grabbing my wrist. We struggled, and I felt his hand close around the keys. He yanked them out of my hand, and I stumbled back, losing my balance. "Tom, stop!" Mom screamed, but he was already running toward the car, keys in hand. I scrambled to my feet, chasing after him, my heart racing. He reached the car and fumbled with the keys, trying to unlock the door. I grabbed his arm, trying to pull him away, but he shoved me back, his strength fueled by desperation. I fell to the ground, pain shooting through my arm as I landed hard on my side. "Get away from me," Tom shouted, his face twisted with rage. He got the car door open and jumped inside, slamming the door behind him. I scrambled to my feet, pounding on the window, but it was too late. The engine roared to life, and he sped off, tires screeching as he tore down the road. I stood there, gasping for breath, my mind reeling. Mom was at my side, her face pale with shock. What do we do?" she whispered. I watched the car disappear around the corner, my hands clenched into fists. "We call the police," I said, my voice shaking. "And we stop him, once and for all." By the time we got back to the house, I was ready to collapse from the weight of everything. Tom had stolen the car, Mom's money was running low, and now the police were on the lookout for him. But as I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a bruised arm and trying to figure out our next move, a new realization hit me. Tom wasn't just desperate, he was scared. Scared of being nothing more than a mistake. Scared of not having a real place in our family. And as much as I hated to admit it, I understood that fear. After all, Mom had kept such a huge secret from both of us. The difference was, I'd had her love and support to ground me. Tom had only had lies. That night, I stayed awake, replaying everything in my mind. There had to be a way to reach him, to make him understand that we weren't the enemy. I wanted to believe that he wasn't beyond saving, that somewhere under all that anger and resentment, the brother I used to know still existed. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tom, just one word, "Sorry." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Was this his way of reaching out? Of admitting he'd gone too far? Or was it just another manipulation? A way to throw us off guard? I texted back, my fingers shaking. "Where are you? We need to talk. Please." I waited, the seconds stretching into minutes, the minutes into an hour. But there was no response. I felt a sick, gnawing fear in my gut. What if he did something drastic? What if the sorry was a goodbye? The next morning, I called the police and told them about the text. They said they'd keep an eye out, but there wasn't much they could do unless Tom turned up somewhere. I spent the day on edge, jumping every time the phone rang, checking the windows every few minutes. Mom was quieter than usual, her face pale and drawn. I could see the worry eating away at her, the guilt weighing her down. "Mom, it's not your fault," I said, sitting beside her on the couch. "You did what you thought was best. We both did." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "I just want my son back," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't care about the money or the lies. I just want him to be safe." I squeezed her hand, trying to offer some comfort, but I knew that until we found Tom, there would be no peace for either of us. Late that afternoon, the phone rang. I grabbed it, my heart racing. It was the police. "We found your car," the officer said. "It's parked outside a motel on the edge of town. We've got units on the way. We'll keep you updated." I hung up, my mind spinning. Tom was at a motel. Maybe he was hiding out, trying to figure out his next move. Maybe he was waiting for us to make the first one. I looked at Mom, my stomach churning with a mix of hope and fear. "They found the car," I said. "He's at a motel. The police are on their way." Mom's eyes filled with tears, and she reached for my hand. "We need to go to him," she said, her voice trembling. "We need to try to talk to him before the police get there." "Mom, it could be dangerous," I said, but she shook her head, determination in her eyes. "He's my son. I have to try." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We drove to the motel, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. As we pulled into the parking lot, I saw the car, parked crookedly in front of a room near the back. I parked next to it, my heart in my throat. "Stay behind me," I whispered to Mom as we got out of the car. I walked to the door, hesitating for a moment before knocking. There was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. It turned easily, and I pushed the door open, my breath catching in my throat. The room was a mess, the bed unmade, clothes strewn across the floor. A bottle of whiskey lay empty on the nightstand, and the air smelled faintly of cigarettes. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the room. Then I saw him. Tom was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, his face buried in his hands. He looked up as we entered, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. For a moment, he just stared at us, and then he slumped forward, his head hanging. "Tom," I said softly, taking a step toward him. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer, just shook his head, his shoulders shaking. I knelt beside him, my heart aching. "Tom, please, talk to us. We can help you." He looked up, his eyes filled with tears. "You can't help me," he said, his voice cracking. "No one can." "Of course we can," Mom said, stepping forward, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We're your family, Tom. We love you." He laughed bitterly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Love me? You lied to me my whole life. Made me believe I was someone I'm not. How is that love?" "I know," Mom said, her voice breaking. "I made a terrible mistake. I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong. I'm so sorry, Tom. Please, let us make it right." Tom looked at her, his face crumpling. "It's too late," he whispered. "I've done things I can't take back." "It's never too late," I said, reaching for his hand. "We can fix this. Together. But you have to let us help you." For a moment, he hesitated, his eyes searching mine. Then he nodded, the fight going out of him. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay." Just then, there was a knock at the door. I turned, my heart pounding, and opened it to find 2 police officers standing there. I explained the situation, my voice shaking, and they listened, nodding. They took Tom into custody, but not with the harshness I had feared. They seemed to understand, to see the broken man behind the crime. As they led Tom away, he looked back at us, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Regret. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "For everything." Mom and I watched as the police car drove away, a heavy silence settling over us. I put my arm around her, pulling her close. We stood there, watching the sun set over the motel, a sense of loss and relief washing over us. "He'll get help," I said quietly, more to reassure myself than anything. "We'll make sure of it." Mom nodded, her face pale but resolute. "He's still my son," she said softly. "No matter what." I hugged her, feeling the tears sting my eyes. Tom had made his choices, and now he had to face the consequences. But he wasn't alone. We'd stand by him, as a family, no matter how hard it got. Because that's what family does. Thank you for reading. Have you ever dealt with a similar situation in your family? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your thoughts.